Hey guys, I just got done painting this wall. Pretty solid coat, I'd say. What do you think? Got you. This is actually a screenshot from 2008 first-person parkour game Mirror's Edge. Despite how much fun it is to speed through this game, it's also one where it's hard not to want to stop and take in the world. Here are these really detailed textures.
You through yet? So that's a no, then.
And the almost surreal, overly orderly architecture. It's got that same appeal as the classic Silent Hills, where it's irresistible to stop and take things in. At times it actually echoes the grungy mood of those games. There's even a bit where you have to quickly avoid a subway train, like in SH3. But I'll get off the train of this comparison now. Mirror's Edge takes place in a city at the edge of the future, a sleek, clean, modern metropolis, where clandestine rooftop couriers deliver illegal packages above the noses of law enforcement.
Once the city used to pulse with energy. Dirty and dangerous, but alive and wonderful. Now, it's something else.
You play as Faith, one of these couriers, who gets framed alongside her cop sister for the murder of a mayoral candidate. The 2000s was really the era of short-haired underground girlies fighting authoritarian regimes. What shall we call this type of game? Girl fight the power? Okay, well, I'll take the credit for coining Digital Apocalypse, and one of you can workshop that one. Speaking of Digital Apocalypse, a gaming aesthetic from the early 2000s where a sleek, sophisticated, technological future was presented as dark and ominous and daunting, Mirror's Edge sort of represents the next step on the evolutionary chain of this style: digital afterlife. Sleek, modern, high-tech, with high-pitched, stark notes in both the UI and soundtrack, giving the game a very digital feel. But rather than dark and ominous, the overall mood leans towards light and calming. Outside of the odd subway and abandoned building, it has an angelic, heavenly-looking sound, like the digital apocalypse ended, and we've all been raptured. This was not an aesthetic that was as dominant in the late 2000s as digital apocalypse was in the early 2000s, but there are some other examples. The king of digital afterlife was certainly not Mirror's Edge, it was Final Fantasy XIII. It's a great aesthetic for this gameplay because you are kind of transgressing in the heavens, soaring through the skies as a mere human with no special powers or tools, defying the natural order of things and touching the untouchable. Like we've seen though, this game isn't all about the highest peaks. Urban trespassing also involves exploring the underbelly of the city. Unused liminal hallways, janitorial offices, air ducts, and secret tunnels let you live off the grid, the lonely, cramped world beneath offering a kind of comfort at times as a refuge from the open area the authorities can also inhabit. Here's where those who want to can play detective and discover a few hidden little story nuggets that flesh out the world. Finding your way into hidden or locked rooms through vents and ducts, stumbling on organic little bits of lore. Ah yes, the vent era. I like the unseen janitor character who's made his own certificate to congratulate himself on a job well done. In a later level, he's implied to be the brother of someone with an office job who has a more authentic looking work certificate. Perhaps one sibling has resentment for the other. Maybe this mirrors Faith's relationship with her cop sister. One's career has veered establishment, and the other has been driven underground. The true Mirror's Edge? Or maybe not. Either way, it's a cool extra story to stumble on as a reward for paying attention, and if anything, I wish there was even more stuff like this in the game to uncover. Mirror's Edge has some beautiful set dressing, cool atmosphere, and intriguing setting. but it's the core gameplay that will keep you coming back as the decades roll on. The game takes place in a series of fairly linear levels. Faith starts at point A and needs to get to point B. By default, the game highlights in red parts of the environment that will lead you to the goal. There's even a button you can press that will make Faith look in the general direction of where your goal is located. But this linear structure doesn't deprive the player of the opportunity to get creative and express themselves. The red highlights are referred to by the game as runner vision, but a lot of the fun of Mirror's Edge comes from developing a runner's vision of your own. Seeing how the environment can be used to even more efficiently reach your goal than by using the one suggested to you by the game. And isn't that exactly the spirit this game about playing as a punk criminal free runner should instill? The urge to break from conformity? Not that the suggested path is devoid of challenge or satisfaction, and there'll be plenty of times where there's only one way to do things, but giving the environment that added depth is what makes the game, like any great platformer, so much fun to replay. It's got that Mario 64 appeal where you have the basic challenge of getting to the objective, but with the underlying challenge of keeping your flow going. Shaving off travel time with a good wall jump, and not wanting to have to come to a standstill to line up a jump if you don't have to. ME understands the appeal of this type of play. There's a lot of ways to land on a ledge. You can grab it with your hands, you can sort of awkwardly land on the edge and have to scramble up a bit, or you can cleanly land keeping your momentum going. To do this, it isn't always just about timing when to jump. Mid-air, you can also hit a button to raise your legs, coiling in to avoid them getting hitched on something. It gives you slightly more height in exchange for a bit of length. Timed right and you can smooth out your run. Momentum begets momentum. Run up to something with enough speed, and Faith will feed that energy into getting over it faster, while doing it with no momentum behind you makes for a slower climb. Maintaining speed helps when being pursued, is intrinsically satisfying, and of course the game tracks your level times if you want to unlock achievements or compete with others. Though the game is unfortunately light on unlockables for mastering courses outside of those achievements. There are additional time trials that doing well in unlocks more time trials. But maybe some New Game Plus cheats or power-ups could have been on offer as well, even cosmetics, as Mirror's Edge, by necessity, was one of the few first-person games when it released to make your character's full body visible. Giving the player a sense of where their limbs are in physical space is key here, helping overcome the sensory limitations video games present to make a first-person platformer enjoyable. The challenge, yet versatility afforded to you by being able to manually coil your legs upwards mid-jump is a cool gameplay mechanic, but whether you successfully coil to cleanly land on top of something, or you fumble it and Faith has to conspicuously drag her legs over the ledge a little with a shudder, either way you get the added immersive quality of feeling more like an actual person and less like a floating camera. Another gameplay element that makes you keenly aware you're a 5'9" girl clocking in at 56 kilos is when you pick up any kind of gun in the game. Different guns impair your movement to different degrees, but anything two-handed makes you feel magnetized to the floor. Only the lightest guns let you continue platforming normally while you have them on you, but even with those, it's quite cumbersome to combine gunplay with platforming. It can be done, but rarely as an optimal strategy, and there aren't many opportunities to do so. As a result, gunplay in Mirror's Edge is pretty indistinguishable from the gunplay in a non-platformer first-person game. You plod about, get a few shots in, and duck behind cover. The level 1 thought when getting to the gunplay is, why is this even here? Distracting from that core, deep and complex platforming play. But then you hit the level 2 thought, which is, well, this is technically optional for the most part. I'm being punished for resorting to picking up guns to deal with enemies when I should be using my platforming toolkit, swift melee moves, and slow-mo disarms to deal with adversaries. That level 2 thought will get you to sleep at night. You may even beat the game still on level 2, until you hit the level 3 thought, which is, wait a minute, what if they had really worked on the gunplay and tried to implement it into platforming for some mad parkour shooter gameplay, sprinkled throughout? But don't worry, because I can get you to the level 4 thought. Aided somewhat by us living in the future, where cool parkour shooters went on to be made, so we don't have to wonder much about what if. The level 4 thought is, well, Maybe a mechanic can exist beyond complementing the core gameplay loop and can be intentionally limited to convey something about the world or the character. Even if guns were in the game even less than they are, picking one up immediately reminds you that you're a skinny woman who excels at being light on her feet and not at handling heavy equipment. They offer another layer of bodily awareness like your visible limbs do. Also, the guns are cool because you can do this. I mean, check out the level of detail. And this? Well, okay, there's only so much they can do. Mirror's Edge offers enough bells and whistles to ground you in reality with its physics and your main character's physical limitations, which makes it all the more satisfying to overcome these limitations and perform stunning feats regardless. For as cheap as you can get the game today, in the holy glow of the Steam sale, Mirror's Edge is a no-brainer addition to your library. It stands tall with an original concept, its depth of play, and striking look. But on release, it was not a no-brainer. The game came out only a few years into the 7th gen, 360 and PS3. In 2008, these consoles were still a big purchase, and after you had dumped the money on them, it was a big ask to pay full price for a 4-hour game, rather than for something longer, or something with an online multiplayer mode to test your new console's online features with. And it wasn't just a 4-hour game, but it was a 4-hour game that left a bad taste in your mouth by the end, which probably didn't help word of mouth. While environmental storytelling stimulates the imagination here, its actual A-story is a confused and rushed fumble that, unlike its graceful protagonist, trips to an incredibly inelegant and unsatisfying ending. Not to mention, most of the story is delivered in these stylized yet stilted 2D animation sequences, which were also not a great selling point. Let's say that in 2008, rather than just hitting the PS2 backlog or investing in the underpowered yet much cheaper Wii, you had decided to purchase one of the fancy new HD consoles like the 360 or PS3. In exchange for that money, you were probably hoping to see the cutting edge of gaming visuals in your storytelling, and not Newgrounds.com animations. So here's what goes down. Use the progress bar to skip the spoiler section if you want. Faith and her sister are framed for the murder of Pope, a politician running for mayor against the incumbent Callahan in the City of City. Faith has to figure out who did it, and one clue is a note Pope was in possession of when he died, that says Icarus. What is Icarus? Well, after a bit of faffing about between leads and red herrings, it turns out Project Icarus was the establishment's plan to create the Parkour Police. Oh no! Do they need permission to do this or something? Would this have guaranteed Pope the election? To reveal to the world that the Parkour Police are in the works to stop the illegal couriers? So the current leaders had to take him out before he told anyone. I mean, maybe. Like, I guess if you heard your tax money was going towards police that can jump, it might sway your vote. It does sound like a very silly idea. But the game doesn't treat it that way. The game frames the Parkour Police like they're gonna be the ultimate crackdown force, and the next step towards total authoritarian control.
I think next time I'll just crouch behind some cover and pop out occasionally.
Things are left so vague, it's hard to know if the full context was thought up or not.
But why Kate?
They needed a CPF cop to look like Pope's killer. No time to explain more.
No, by all means, I'll wait. I'm still waiting to this day. Anyway, the implication by the end is that Callahan ordered the hit and recruited Faith's good pal Celeste to do it. Yes, your tutorial buddy is a double agent, resulting in a rival showdown later in the game. But her motivation is survival and not being a wanted fugitive anymore. Motivations that pose a problem for the game, because they're a little too down to earth and relatable, and Mirror's Edge still wants to have some kind of maniacal evil maniac at the end we can stamp out in a final confrontation without a shred of remorse. Since Callahan is never shown in the game, presumably so they can be the final boss of some theoretical future game that will never exist. Instead, at the last minute, the game decides this jokey guy that Faith had tracked down a couple times for information is actually in on the conspiracy too, and crazy evil for no real reason.
This city can clean up the last of its dregs.
So we can still have a final boss to dropkick. If you can call jumping once to trigger a cutscene or boss fight. It's like, why even bother trying to shoehorn a final boss into this game? Someone irredeemable to take out our anger on at the end. If you just have to pick out a character at random for it, and the fight itself is basically a 5-second QuickTime event. This ending is incoherent. Faith saves her sister from being taken away, and this SWAT team that was here 2 seconds ago just disappears, so the camera can zoom out with a faux poignancy, meant to imply we've reached the end of some kind of epic journey, when in reality barely anything has been accomplished. Other than I guess now Faith's sister has to live in hiding in a bin somewhere, and the bad guy's servers will be offline for a week. The final level's design does feel climactic though. Starting the level looking up at the tallest tower yet. This visual invitation to the ultimate platforming challenge the game has is daunting, but exhilarating to accept. However, ultimately, there's a mixed message throughout the level. The stage's design is telling you you're at the climax, while the story can't help but put all its eggs in the sequel basket, letting you know true catharsis lies at the end of some future title that may or may not be made. I think short, single-player games should have self-contained stories, because you want an intense scenario at the climax to complement the intensity of the difficulty curve, instead of just setting the final level in a big building and hoping that will get the job done. Plenty have done that while still leaving the door open for sequel material. But let's stop all this harsh criticism, because, you know, I'm a great guy, right? I'm a great YouTube guy, empathetic, understanding, maybe a little bit dashing to complement those other traits. So of course, someone as magnanimous as me can acknowledge that the story being this bungled and rushed likely could have been due to bits and pieces of this game being cut and moved around as deadlines approached. They wanted to get the gameplay and the visuals in place. That was the most important thing to do. Nobody set out for things to end up this way, this short and this rushed. I'm sure it was nobody's fault.
This unfortunate incident is officially nobody's fault.
Coward. Got like 20 pages of notes there. You were expecting to bore us for at least half an hour.
Jumping forward a bit, I think the story of this game dropping the ball so badly did have a negative effect on its future. The quote-unquote sequel, Catalyst, released in 2016, wanted nothing to do with it, and reset itself to tell a different story, which kind of broke the momentum Mirror's Edge had as a franchise and undermined the rush of having it return. Breaking momentum? Undermining the rush? The antithesis of the Mirror's Edge way. In a way, Mirror's Edge kind of gives me the same feeling Vanquish does. Some great core mechanics, an awkward sniper level, and a story that fizzles out, leaving you unfulfilled by the end. But unlike Vanquish's giant noisy cylinder of war and death, on top of fun core gameplay, Mirror's Edge has a world I like to soak up and spend time in too. The clean rooftop utopia is relaxing. The sound of vehicles muffled in the background, the bustle of the city lost in the distance, and the rush of the wind as you make your way around. Mirror's Edge provides places just as much fun to be in as they are to escape, and when you can have it both ways like that, living on the edge isn't so bad.